Dusk settled over Oakridge as Thomas Blackwood rode into town, his shadow long against the dusty main street. He'd spent 15 years avoiding this place, 15 years running from memories that still haunted his dreams. That's when he saw her, a young woman, clearly with child, collapsed in the dirt as townsfolk merely passed by. Without hesitation, Thomas dismounted and rushed to her side. Her faint pulse confirmed she was alive, but barely. As he lifted her into his arms, whispers spread among the gathering crowd. Nobody recognized her, yet Thomas's face had drained of all color. What connection did this mysterious woman have to a man who'd sworn never to return? Would helping her force him to confront the very secrets he'd fled from all those years ago? The town doctor's office was dimly lit by oil lamps, casting long shadows across the worn floorboards. Thomas laid the unconscious woman gently on the examination table, her breathing shallow, face pale against her dark hair. He stepped back, removing his hat, revealing the premature grey at his temples. "Never thought I'd see you back in Oakridge, Thomas," Samuel Hayes said, setting down his medical bag. The years had aged him, his once auburn hair now white, deep lines etched around kind eyes that had seen too much suffering. "Makes two of us, Sam," Thomas replied, his voice rough from years of minimal conversation. "Found her collapsed in the street. Nobody was helping." "Some things never change around here," Dr. Hayes muttered, examining the woman. "She's severely dehydrated, exhausted. How far along would you say?" 7, maybe 8 months. Thomas moved toward the window, gazing out at the town he'd sworn never to return to. Main Street looked much the same. The general store, the saloon, the sheriff's office, all preserved like a photograph in an album. Nobody opened anymore. From his saddlebag, Thomas retrieved a worn leather journal. He thumbed through pages filled with sketches and notes, a chronicle of 15 years spent running. Oakridge appeared in those pages too, though those sketches were darker, heavier, as if the pencil had dug into the paper with anger rather than purpose. Dr. Hayes looked up from his examination. "She'll need care. Few days at least." Thomas nodded, knowing what that meant. He'd have to stay. "Word travels fast here, Thomas. Sheriff Wilson already knows you're back." At the mention of Wilson's name, Thomas's jaw tightened. "We've got history. You've got history with half this town." Dr. Hayes applied a cool compress to the woman's forehead. "People still talk about that day, you know." Thomas closed the journal with a snap. "People ought to mind their business. It was everyone's business when Eleanor disappeared, especially with you leaving town the next day." Before Thomas could respond, the door swung open. Martha Jenkins stood in the doorframe, arms crossed over her chest, grey hair pulled back in a severe bun. She'd aged too, but her eyes remained sharp as ever. "So the rumors are true," she said, looking Thomas up and down. "Prodigal son returns, not looking for any fatted calves, Martha." Thomas touched the brim of his hat in greeting. "Just passing through." Martha's gaze shifted to the pregnant woman. "Another girl in trouble?" Thomas bristled, but Dr. Hayes intervened. "Martha owns the boarding house now. Been looking after half the town since her husband passed." "Sorry to hear about James," Thomas said. "Been 6 years," Martha replied flatly. "You'd have known if you'd bothered to write." An uncomfortable silence filled the room, broken only by the ticking of the doctor's wall clock and the woman's labored breathing. "She'll need somewhere to stay," Dr. Hayes said finally. Martha sighed. "I've got a room, and I suppose you'll be needing one too, Thomas." Before he could answer, the door burst open again. Sheriff Wilson filled the frame, older and heavier, but still imposing in his dusty uniform. His hand rested casually on his holstered pistol, a gesture Thomas didn't miss. "Blackwood." The sheriff's voice was cold as January. "Didn't think we'd be seeing you again." Thomas met his gaze steadily. "Just helping someone in need, Sheriff. Always the hero," Wilson replied, eyes narrowing. "We remember the last time you tried playing savior in this town." Thomas's hand instinctively moved toward his hip, where a gun would have been years ago. Dr. Hayes stepped between them. "This isn't the time or place, gentlemen. I have a patient." Sheriff Wilson glanced at the unconscious woman. "And who might she be?" "Don't know," Thomas answered honestly. "Found her collapsed in the street." "Convenient," Wilson said, disbelief evident in his tone. "Committee meeting tonight at the town hall. Folks will want to know about our visitors." His gaze lingered on Thomas. "Don't go disappearing again before we get some answers." After the sheriff left, Martha broke the tense silence. "You can both stay at the boarding house. But I don't want any trouble, Thomas. Didn't come looking for it." "Never do," she replied, "yet it follows you like a shadow." As Martha departed, Dr. Hayes checked the woman's pulse again. "She's stabilizing. I've seen this before in women on the run. Exhaustion, malnutrition. She's been pushing herself too hard." Thomas stared at the woman's face. Something about her seemed familiar, yet he couldn't place it. "I'll stay until she's on her feet." "That might be a while," the doctor warned. "I've got time," Thomas replied, though they both knew it wasn't true. In Oakridge, time wasn't something he had in abundance, not with the past waiting to collect its due. Outside, whispers spread through town like wildfire. Thomas Blackwood had returned, and he wasn't alone. Martha's boarding house stood at the edge of town, a two-story structure with a wide porch and peeling white paint. Thomas carried the pregnant woman up the stairs, following Martha's stiff back. The floorboards creaked under his boots, a familiar sound that transported him back to his youth. "Room at the end of the hall," Martha instructed, lighting their way with an oil lamp. "Used to be Eleanor." The name hung in the air between them, heavy with unspoken accusations. Thomas faltered for a moment, then continued down the hallway. Inside the room, time seemed frozen. Simple furnishings, lace curtains that Eleanor had sewn herself, and the faint scent of lavender that Martha still used the linens. "You kept it the same," Thomas observed, gently laying the woman on the bed. "Some things deserve remembering," Martha replied, her voice softer now. She helped remove the woman's dusty boots and covered her with a quilt. "I'll bring up some broth when she wakes." Left alone, Thomas stood at the window, watching as lamps were lit throughout town. From his pocket he withdrew his father's silver pocket watch, the case worn smooth from years of handling. The watch had stopped 15 years ago, on the day he left Oakridge, and he'd never wound it again. A deliberate decision. Time in Oakridge had ended for him there. A soft knock interrupted his thoughts. Dr. Hayes entered, carrying his medical bag. "How is she?" Thomas asked. "Resting comfortably. The baby seems fine, but she's been through quite an ordeal." The doctor set down his bag and pulled up a chair. "You know, Thomas, people still ask about you, not just the bad things." Thomas scoffed. "Like what? Like how you pulled the Miller boy from the creek during the flood, or how you helped rebuild the widow Johnson's barn after the lightning strike. Ancient history. Not to them." Hayes gestured toward the window. "Not to this town." Thomas turned the pocket watch over in his hand. "This town has a selective memory. People fear what they don't understand. Eleanor's disappearance, you leaving the next day, it made for convenient storytelling. A sound from the bed drew their attention. The woman stirred but didn't wake. In sleep her face relaxed, revealing youth that hardship had temporarily masked. "I should have done more," Thomas said quietly, more to himself than Hayes. "For Eleanor. You were barely 20. We all should have done more." The door opened again and Martha entered with a tray. Town meetings starting, sheriffs already telling tales about dangerous strangers. Thomas clenched his jaw. He always did have a gift for fiction. "You could attend," Hayes suggested. "Speak for yourself. Wouldn't change anything." Martha set down the tray with a deliberate clatter. "Hiding didn't serve you 15 years ago, Thomas. Doubt it'll serve you any better now." She nodded toward the unconscious woman. "Or her." After they left, Thomas pulled a chair to the bedside. The woman's breathing had steadied, color gradually returning to her cheeks. In the lamplight he noticed a thin chain around her neck, disappearing beneath her collar. Carefully he drew it out, a simple gold band hung on the chain. "A wedding ring." "Who are you?" he murmured. "And what brought you here of all places?" From the town hall came the distant sound of raised voices. The meeting had turned contentious, as Oakridge meetings often did. Thomas recalled his father attending those same meetings, returning home frustrated by small minds and smaller hearts. The pocket watch had been his father's. James Blackwood, once respected, later ostracized for defending a young woman accused of theft. The Blackwood reputation for trouble had begun long before Thomas. Outside, a figure moved through the shadows toward the boarding house. Thomas tensed, hand instinctively reaching for a weapon he no longer carried. The figure passed beneath a street lamp, just young Billy Carter, delivering evening newspapers. Thomas exhaled slowly, realizing how quickly old habits had returned. The town meeting dispersed, voices echoing down empty streets. Thomas recognized Sheriff Wilson's authoritative bark, followed by murmurs of agreement. Tomorrow would bring questions, suspicion, and the inevitable confrontation with his past. The woman on the bed shifted again, eyelids fluttering. Thomas leaned forward, waiting, but she subsided into deeper sleep. Dr. Hayes had left medicine on the nightstand, laudanum for pain, though Thomas knew from experience it often brought troubling dreams. His own dreams had been haunted for 15 years. Eleanor's face, her voice calling his name, and always the same ending. Thomas running through fog-shrouded woods, searching, calling, finding nothing but silence. He'd wake gasping, sheets soaked with sweat. The guilt as fresh as the day he'd fled Oakridge. Not this time, he whispered to the sleeping woman. A promise to her, to himself, or perhaps to Eleanor's memory, he wasn't sure. As midnight approached, Thomas settled into the chair for a long vigil. Outside, Oakridge grew quiet, but inside his mind, the past roared like a freight train on worn tracks, hurtling toward a destination he could no longer avoid. Dawn broke over Oakridge, painting the weathered buildings in soft gold. Thomas had dozed fitfully in the chair, awakening at every sound. He stood, stretching stiff muscles, and moved to the window. The town was stirring, shopkeepers sweeping porches, the blacksmith stoking his forge. A soft moan from the bed drew his attention. The woman's eyes fluttered open, revealing deep brown irises clouded with confusion. "Water," she whispered, voice cracked from dryness. Thomas poured a glass from the pitcher Martha had left. He helped her sit up slightly, supporting her head as she drank in small, desperate sips. "Easy now," he murmured. "You're safe." Her eyes darted around the room, then focused on Thomas with sudden weariness. "Where am I?" "Oakridge. Found you collapsed in the street yesterday." He set the glass down. "I'm Thomas." She hesitated, one hand moving protectively to her swollen belly. "Sarah," she finally offered. "The doctor says you and your baby should be fine with rest." Thomas pulled his chair closer. "What brought you to Oakridge, Sarah?" Before she could answer, the door opened. Martha entered, carrying a breakfast tray, her expression softening at the sight of the conscious woman. "Good, you're awake. You had us worried." Martha set down the tray and pressed a hand to Sarah's forehead. "Fever's broken. Think you can manage some porridge?" Sarah nodded, still guarded but clearly hungry. "After you eat, Sheriff Wilson wants to speak with you," Martha added, her tone suggesting this wasn't optional. "Sheriff?" Fear flashed across Sarah's face. Thomas exchanged a look with Martha. "Standard procedure for strangers in town," he assured Sarah, though he knew Wilson's interest likely stemmed from her arrival with Thomas. Martha huffed. "That man's been looking for reasons to throw his weight around since they pinned that badge on him." She helped Sarah sit up properly. "I'll be downstairs if you need anything." Once alone, Sarah ate hungrily while Thomas watched. Questions mounting. Something about her seemed increasingly familiar, the way she tucked hair behind her ear, the slight furrow between her brows when concentrating. "You're staring," she said without looking up. "Sorry." Thomas moved back to the window. "Just trying to figure you out." "Not much to figure." She set aside the empty bowl. "Just a woman down on her luck." "In my experience, luck has little to do with ending up collapsed in a strange town." A ghost of a smile crossed her lips. "You sound like someone who knows about bad choices." "Made my share." Thomas turned as a commotion rose from the street below. Sheriff Wilson was approaching the boarding house, accompanied by 2 deputies. Looks like our conversation will have to wait. Sarah's hand shot out, grabbing his wrist with surprising strength. Please don't leave. The desperation in her voice stirred something protective in Thomas. I'll stay. Heavy boots on the stairs announced the sheriff's arrival. Wilson entered without knocking, filling the doorframe with his imposing figure. Miss, he nodded to Sarah, then fixed his gaze on Thomas. Found something interesting in the telegraph office this morning. He removed a folded paper from his vest pocket, a wanted poster, yellowed with age, but clear enough. The sketch showed a young woman, her resemblance to Sarah unmistakable despite being years younger. Eleanor. Sarah gasped, then immediately pressed her lips together as if regretting the word. Thomas's blood ran cold. Eleanor sighed. The name that had haunted him for 15 years. You know this woman? Wilson demanded. Sarah's eyes darted to Thomas, then back to the sheriff. My sister, she admitted quietly. Wilson's gaze hardened. Your sister was wanted for theft and questioning in a disappearance here, 15 years back. He looked pointedly at Thomas. Convenient you should show up now with her kin. I'd never met Sarah before yesterday, Thomas said firmly. Yet she knows you're Eleanor. Wilson's emphasis on your carried years of insinuation. I was looking for her, Sarah interjected. I haven't seen her in years. Wilson studied her face for signs of deception. Well, Miss Sarah, once you're recovered, we'll have a proper talk down at my office. His tone left no doubt this would be an interrogation. To Thomas, he added, Town council wants to see you. Now. After the sheriff departed, silence filled the room. Thomas stared at Sarah, pieces beginning to align in a picture he wasn't sure he wanted to see. Eleanor, he said finally, you came looking for Eleanor. Sarah nodded, tears welling in her eyes. She wrote to me, years ago, mentioned this town, and you. She reached beneath her collar and withdrew the chain, the wedding ring gleaming in the morning light. Said if anything happened to her, I should find Thomas Blackwood. Outside, a church bell tolled the hour. 9 chimes that seemed to count down to an inevitable reckoning, each one driving Thomas deeper into the past he'd tried so desperately to escape. The town hall's wooden benches had been worn smooth by generations of townspeople. Thomas sat stiffly before the council, 5 men whose expressions ranged from open hostility to cautious neutrality. Harold Montgomery, the town's founder and wealthiest resident, presided from the center seat, his silver hair and tailored suit marking him as a man apart from the farmers and merchants of Oakridge. Miss Blackwood, Montgomery began, voice smooth as creek stones. Your return has caused quite a stir. Wasn't my intention, Thomas replied. Yet here we are. Montgomery steepled his fingers. Sheriff Wilson tells us the young woman you brought to town is connected to Eleanor Wade. The name spoken aloud sent a ripple through the room. Townsfolk seated in the gallery leaned forward, eager for gossip. She's Eleanor's sister, Thomas said simply. No point denying what Wilson had already reported. Montgomery's eyes narrowed slightly. A remarkable coincidence, wouldn't you say? Thomas met his gaze. Life's full of them. From his coat, Montgomery withdrew a tattered envelope. This was found among the young woman's possessions. He extracted a single sheet of paper. A letter, addressed simply to Oakridge, no recipient named. Thomas tensed. You went through her things. Sheriff Wilson did his duty, Montgomery countered. The letter mentions hidden wealth and secrets worth dying for. Troubling language. Sarah was looking for her sister, Thomas said firmly. Nothing more. Judge Parker, the eldest council member, spoke up. Eleanor Wade was suspected of stealing from the mining company before she disappeared. If her sister knows where that money went. Eleanor didn't steal anything, Thomas snapped, old anger flaring. You were hardly objective where she was concerned. Montgomery replied coolly. Your relationship clouded your judgment then. I fear it does so now. Thomas stood abruptly, causing several council members to flinch. Say what you mean to say. Montgomery remained unruffled. Simply this: Oakridge has prospered in peace since those troubled days. We don't need old wounds reopened. Is that a threat? A statement of fact? Montgomery rose, signaling the meeting's end. The council has agreed to allow the young woman to recuperate here. You, however, Miss Blackwood, would do well to continue your travels once she's able to fend for herself. As the council dispersed, Dr. Hayes approached Thomas. That could have gone worse. Give it time, Thomas muttered. They walked together, down Main Street, past storefronts where shopkeepers suddenly found windows needing cleaning, anything to observe the town's returned black sheep. Montgomery's afraid, Hayes remarked. Of what? A pregnant woman and a washed-up cowboy. Hayes gave Thomas a sidelong glance. Of the truth. Always has been. At the boarding house, they found Sarah sitting on the porch, wrapped in one of Martha's shawls. Her color had improved dramatically, her eyes alert as they followed a group of children playing in the street. Should you be up? Thomas asked, taking the chair beside her. Needed air. She smiled faintly. Martha's been telling me about Eleanor. Thomas tensed. What did she say? That my sister was kind, smart, that she helped at the school. Sarah turned to face him fully. That she loved you. Thomas looked away. Martha talks too much. Not enough, I think. Sarah reached into her pocket and withdrew the letter Montgomery had mentioned. They gave it back, said it wasn't evidence of anything. May I? Thomas held out his hand. Sarah hesitated, then placed the letter in his palm. The paper was thin, the handwriting unmistakably Eleanor's delicate, yet determined strokes that he'd once watched form his name on notes passed during church services. My dearest Sarah, it began, if you're reading this, something has gone terribly wrong. There are secrets in Oakridge, buried deep as the mine shafts that made its fortune. I've found something, proof of what I suspected. There's wealth hidden here, not in gold, but in truth. Find Thomas Blackwood. He may hate me now, but he's a good man. Trust him with this, if you can't trust anyone else. The letter ended abruptly, without signature, as if Eleanor had been interrupted while writing. When did you get this? Thomas asked, his throat tight. 3 months ago. It came with this. She touched the ring hanging around her neck. It was our mother's. Dr. Hayes, who had been listening quietly, spoke up. Eleanor disappeared 15 years ago. Why did the letter only reach you now? Sarah's eyes grew distant. I was just a child when Eleanor left home. We moved around a lot after that. This letter found me through a series of forwarding addresses, almost like Eleanor knew it would take time. Or she wanted it to arrive at a specific time, Thomas mused, studying the postmark. The letter had been mailed 2 days before Eleanor vanished. A shadow fell across the porch. Sheriff Wilson stood at the bottom of the steps, hat in hand, an unusual show of deference. Miss Sarah, he said formally, there's been a development. A man arrived in town asking after a pregnant woman matching your description. Wilson's eyes flicked to Thomas. He's carrying a gun, and he doesn't look like the type to take no for an answer. Sarah's face drained of color, one hand protectively covering her belly. He found me, she whispered. Who is he? Thomas demanded, helping Sarah back into the house as Sheriff Wilson followed. Sarah sank into a chair, trembling visibly. His name is James Garrett. He works for Eleanor's husband. Husband? Thomas and Dr. Hayes exchanged startled looks. Not by choice, Sarah clarified, bitterness edging her voice. Eleanor married Richard Hollister when I was 12, a business arrangement our father made before he died. She touched her belly. Hollister expects the same of me. The baby's not his? Sheriff Wilson asked, his tone professional but gentler than Thomas had heard before. Sarah shook her head. I was to marry his son. I refused. Martha appeared from the kitchen, wiping her hands on her apron. So you ran. Eleanor's letter arrived. It seemed providential. Sarah looked to Thomas. I thought she might be here, that she'd escaped him too. Thomas ran a hand through his hair. Eleanor never mentioned being married. She wouldn't have, Sarah said softly. She was ashamed. Hollister's cruel, but powerful. He owns half the businesses in 3 counties back home. Where is home exactly? Sheriff Wilson asked. Colorado Territory. Sarah hesitated. Hollister has connections, judges, lawmen. Garrett won't be alone for long. The sheriff straightened his vest. Well, he's alone now, and this is my jurisdiction. A hint of pride colored his words. I'll have a word with Mr. Garrett. Explain that harassing a woman in my town isn't tolerated. After Wilson departed, Martha bustled about making tea. You'll stay here, she told Sarah firmly. Sheriff may be a stubborn mule, but he keeps order. Dr. Hayes touched Thomas's arm. A word. They stepped onto the porch. This complicates things. When don't they? Thomas leaned against the railing, watching as Wilson approached a man outside the saloon. Even from a distance, Garrett's rigid posture and quick movements spoke of danger. Eleanor married, Hayes mused. All those times she spoke of freedom, of traveling west with you, she was already trapped. The realization hit Thomas like a physical blow. All those plans we made, she knew they were just dreams. Perhaps, or perhaps, she truly believed you could help her escape. Hayes studied Thomas's profile. You loved her. It wasn't a question, but Thomas answered anyway. More than made sense for a dirt-poor ranch hand, and the prettiest girl in 3 territories. Their conversation halted as shouting erupted from the saloon. Garrett and Wilson were face to face, the stranger's hand hovering near his holstered pistol. The sheriff's deputies flanked him, hands on their weapons. This won't end well, Thomas muttered, starting down the steps. Hayes caught his arm. Not your fight, Thomas. Became my fight when Sarah showed up with Eleanor's letter. Inside, Sarah had moved to the window, watching the confrontation with naked fear. Garrett won't leave without me. Hollister pays him too well. Martha snorted. Money isn't everything, child. It is to men like them. Sarah clutched the windowsill. They're coming this way. Thomas moved to the door. Stay inside, both of you. On the street, Sheriff Wilson was walking toward the boarding house, Garrett following several paces behind, their faces set in mirror images of determination. Thomas descended the porch steps to meet them. Mr. Blackwood, Wilson nodded curtly. Mr. Garrett here claims legal authority to retrieve Miss Sarah. Says he has papers from her guardian. Garrett was shorter than Thomas had expected, but solid, with cold eyes that assessed threats by habit. He held out a folded document. Sarah Thompson is a minor and ward of Richard Hollister, her legal guardian following her father's death. I'm authorized to return her to his care. Thomas took the paper, noting the official seals and signatures. She's carrying a child, not in any condition to travel. Her condition is precisely why Mr. Hollister wants her home, Garrett replied smoothly. The child is his grandson's. The family has rights. The woman has rights too, Thomas countered. Garrett's eyes narrowed. The law says otherwise. From inside his jacket, Garrett produced another document, a yellow deed with elaborate lettering. Mr. Hollister also asked me to inquire about certain properties. He believes his late wife may have had interests in Oakridge. Wilson took the deed, frowning as he read. This claims ownership of the North Ridge mining operation. That's Montgomery's land. Is it? Garrett's tone suggested otherwise. Mr. Hollister inherited several unexpected holdings after his wife's passing. He's been tracing their origins. Thomas's mind raced. The North Ridge mine had been the source of Oakridge's original wealth, and numerous disputed claims. Eleanor was investigating the mine before she disappeared. Garrett's expression flickered with interest. You knew Eleanor Hollister. Eleanor Wade, Thomas corrected firmly. Her maiden name, yes. Garrett tucked the deed away. Mr. Hollister would be most interested in speaking with anyone who knew his late wife's activities during her unauthorized absence. Late wife? Thomas felt a chill. Eleanor is dead? Officially, yes. 3 years ago. Garrett's cold eyes assessed Thomas. Though Mr. Hollister has his doubts, hence my presence here. The implications hung in the air like gun smoke. Eleanor might still be alive, and if she was, Hollister was hunting her too. Night descended on Oakridge, bringing no relief from the day's tensions. Thomas sat on the boarding house porch, a rifle across his lap, borrowed from Martha, who'd produced it from beneath her kitchen counter with practiced ease. Inside, Sarah slept fitfully, Martha keeping watch from a rocking chair beside the bed. Sheriff Wilson had ordered Garrett to stay at the hotel while legal matters were sorted. A temporary solution at best. Footsteps approached in the darkness. Thomas raised the rifle slightly, then lowered it as Dr. Hayes emerged into the pool of lantern light. "Thought you could use company," Hayes said, settling into the chair beside Thomas. From his coat, he produced a flask. "And this?" Thomas accepted the whiskey, taking a measured sip. "You're getting reckless in your old age, Doc." "Age has its privileges." Hayes gazed up at the stars. "What's your plan?" "Don't have one yet." Thomas handed back the flask. "Sarah can't travel, but she can't stay either. Not with Garrett circling. And Montgomery," Hayes added. He was asking questions about the mining deed. Garrett showed. Seemed rattled. "Montgomery doesn't rattle easy. Everyone has their pressure points." Hayes took a drink. "Eleanor found his. I'd wager." Thomas nodded slowly. "She was looking into land deeds before she disappeared. Said something wasn't right with the mine ownership. Montgomery's grandfather established the original claim. Family legend. Legends have a way of improving with retelling." They fell silent as a figure moved down the street, just the night watchman making his rounds. Thomas's hand relaxed on the rifle. Sarah had this. Thomas reached into his shirt pocket and withdrew a small object that caught the lamplight, an antique locket on a delicate chain. It was hidden in the lining of her bag. Hayes leaned closer. "May I?" Thomas handed it over. The locket was silver, tarnished with age, an elaborate W engraved on its face. "Wade family heirloom?" Hayes asked, attempting to open it. "Seems stuck," Thomas said. "But look at the back." Hayes turned it over, squinting at tiny engraved words. "Property of North Ridge Mining Company, 1835. Before Montgomery's time, before Oakridge existed." Thomas confirmed. "Sarah says Eleanor sent it to her with instructions to keep it safe. A company locket, for the owner's wife, I'd guess." Thomas took it back, tucking it away carefully. "Question is, who was the rightful owner?" Hayes looked troubled. "If Montgomery's claim wasn't legitimate, then Oakridge's founding fortune was built on theft." Thomas finished the thought. "No wonder Eleanor disappeared." The boarding house door opened, and Martha stepped out. "Sarah's asking for you, Thomas." Inside, Sarah sat propped against pillows, her face pale but composed. She held a cup of tea that steamed in the cool night air. "You found it," she said, noticing Thomas's hand drift to his pocket where the locket rested. "What is it, Sarah?" Thomas asked, taking the chair beside her bed. "Why was it so important to Eleanor?" Sarah glanced at Martha and Hayes. "Can we trust them?" "With your life," Thomas assured her. "Already are." Sarah nodded, then reached for a small pouch tied around her waist beneath her dress. From it she withdrew a tiny key. "This opens the locket. Eleanor sent them separately for safety." Thomas brought out the locket, accepting the key. It turned with difficulty in the tarnished lock, but the locket finally opened with a soft click. Inside was not a portrait as expected, but a tightly folded piece of paper. With careful fingers, Thomas unfolded it, a miniature map showing what appeared to be mine tunnels, with an X marked in red ink. "What is this?" Hayes asked, peering over Thomas's shoulder. "The proof Eleanor mentioned." Sarah replied. "She said it shows where the original mine deed is hidden. The real one, not the forgery Montgomery filed." Martha inhaled sharply. "If this is true, half the land in Oakridge rightfully belongs to someone else." "To Eleanor," Sarah said quietly. "Our grandmother was Mary Wade before marriage. Her brother was the original mine owner. When he died without children, The mine should have passed to her. Instead, it went to Montgomery's grandfather, who married her under false pretenses, then declared her insane when she discovered his scheme. How did Eleanor learn all this? Thomas asked. Our mother's journals. Eleanor found them after father died. Sarah's hand went to her belly as the baby kicked. That's why she came to Oakridge, to find proof of our family's claim. Thomas studied the tiny map. These tunnels were abandoned years ago, collapsed in some places. And the X? Hayes asked. Old foreman's office, Thomas replied, built into the mountainside itself. I worked there one summer. His eyes met Sarah's. If the deed exists, it would destroy Montgomery and give Eleanor or her heirs rightful ownership, Sarah added, her meaning clear as she cradled her unborn child. A sound from outside silenced them, horses approaching. Thomas moved to the window. Sheriff Wilson was dismounting, his expression grim. Behind him rode Harold Montgomery himself, immaculate even at this late hour. They know, Martha whispered. Thomas pocketed the locket. Time we weren't here. The old hunting cabin stood deep in the woods beyond Oakridge's northern boundary, almost invisible among the pines. Thomas had built it years ago, a sanctuary when town life became too constraining. Now it served a more urgent purpose. Rest here, Thomas told Sarah, helping her onto the cabin's single bed. The journey through the night had been difficult for her, though she'd shown remarkable resilience. Hayes busied himself starting a fire in the small stone hearth. She should be in town, not hiding in the woods. Town's not safe anymore, Martha replied, unpacking the supplies they'd hastily gathered. Not with Montgomery on the warpath. They'd slipped out through the boarding house's back door just as Sheriff Wilson knocked at the front. Martha had created a diversion, something about a missing guest and stolen silver, giving them precious minutes to escape. How did Montgomery know? Sarah asked, her voice thin with exhaustion. Garrett, Thomas guessed, checking that the cabin's shutters were secure. He must have shown Montgomery the mining deed. Or Montgomery has been watching all along, Hayes suggested. Eleanor's return to Oakridge would be his worst nightmare. Martha placed a cool cloth on Sarah's forehead. What matters now is keeping you safe until the baby comes. Then we can decide our next move. Sarah grasped Thomas's hand. We need to find the original deed. It's the only leverage we have against Hollister and Montgomery. Thomas nodded grimly. The mine tunnels are dangerous, unstable after years of neglect. I know those tunnels better than most, Hayes offered unexpectedly. Treated plenty of miners in my day, had to go in after the injured more than once. Thomas regarded his old friend with new appreciation. We'll go tomorrow. First light. As dawn approached, Thomas stood watch at the cabin's single window. The forest was quiet, save for the occasional owl or rustling deer. His thoughts, however, were a clamor of memory and speculation. Eleanor had discovered a conspiracy that struck at Oakridge's very foundation. Had she found the proof before disappearing? If so, what had happened to her? The questions circled like wolves around a weakened prey. Hayes joined him at the window, offering coffee from a dented pot. You look 1,000 miles away. 15 years, Thomas corrected, accepting the cup, trying to piece together what happened. To Eleanor, Hayes sipped his own coffee. We all wondered. I abandoned her, Thomas said softly, the admission painful even after so long. She asked me to meet her that night. I was late. By the time I reached our spot by the river, she was gone, just this, left behind. From his pocket, Thomas withdrew a blood-stained handkerchief, the monogram EW still visible in one corner. I searched for days. Nothing. Everyone assumed she'd run off. I knew better. You think someone harmed her. I know it. Thomas carefully refolded the handkerchief. But without proof, without her, I was just the lovesick fool making accusations. Hayes studied the stained fabric. You've carried this all these years. Reminder of my failure. Thomas tucked it away. Won't happen again. Not with Sarah. Martha approached quietly. She's sleeping. Baby's active though, kicking up a storm. How soon? Thomas asked. A week, maybe less. Martha wrapped her shawl tighter. First babies often come early. Their conversation halted at the sound of distant hoofbeats. Thomas doused the lantern, motioning for silence. The riders passed half a mile away. A search party, no doubt, but moving in the wrong direction. They'll widen the search by noon, Thomas predicted. We need to move quickly. The tunnels, Hayes agreed. If we find the deed, we gain leverage, and if we don't, then we pray Sarah delivers a healthy child, and you both run far from Oakridge. As the others prepared for sleep, Thomas stepped outside, breathing the pre-dawn air. The first hint of pink touched the eastern sky, promising a clear day. From the direction of town came another sound, a church bell tolling not for services but as an alarm. The search was intensifying. Thomas felt a presence behind him and turned to find Sarah, wrapped in a blanket against the chill. You should be resting, he chided gently. The baby disagrees. She smiled faintly, then grew serious. I heard what you told Dr. Hayes about the handkerchief. Thomas tensed. Ancient history. Not to you. Sarah's eyes held a wisdom beyond her years. Not to Eleanor either. She spoke of you in her letters, said you were the only one who would believe her, who would understand what Montgomery had done. And what was that exactly? Sarah looked toward the distant mountains where the mine entrance was carved into the rock face. Murder, she said simply. Eleanor believed Montgomery's grandfather murdered our great-uncle for the mine. The deed would prove the claim was rightfully ours, but the map leads to something more, a confession hidden with the deed. A confession, after all these years, written by Mary Wade herself before she died in the asylum. Sarah shivered, not entirely from the cold. Eleanor said it would destroy not Montgomery's fortune, but his family's entire legacy. Thomas understood now why Montgomery had appeared so shaken. It wasn't just about land or money. It was about the carefully constructed myth of Oakridge's founding family. We'll find it, he promised. For Eleanor. Sarah touched his arm. For the truth. That's what she would have wanted. Behind them, the cabin door opened as Hayes emerged, medical bag in hand. We'd best get started. Those riders will be back. Thomas nodded, his resolve hardening like forge-worked iron. The time for running was over. The Northridge mine entrance gaped like an open wound in the mountainside, wooden support beams rotting at the edges. Thomas and Dr. Hayes approached cautiously, lanterns casting long shadows in the early morning light. They'd left Sarah with Martha at the cabin, promising to return by nightfall. Doesn't look stable, Hayes observed, testing a support beam that crumbled slightly at his touch. Hasn't been worked in nearly a decade, Thomas replied. Montgomery closed it after a collapse killed 3 men. Said the vein was tapped out. Convenient timing. Right after Eleanor started asking questions, Hayes consulted the tiny map from the locket. According to this, the foreman's office is 200 yards in, then left at the main junction. Thomas nodded, ducking to enter the low tunnel. The smell hit him immediately. Damp earth, rotting wood, and something metallic that clung to the back of his throat. Memories surfaced of his brief time working these shafts, chipping away at rock for pitiful wages, while Montgomery's men watched with calculating eyes. Stay close, he warned Hayes, and watch for rats. They nest in abandoned places like this. They proceeded slowly, testing each step before committing their weight. Occasionally a distant drip or the scuttling of small creatures broke the silence. The main shaft gradually widened, evidence of its once productive past visible in the methodical excavation. Junction should be just ahead, Hayes murmured, his voice unnaturally loud in the confined space. The tunnel suddenly opened to a larger chamber where 3 separate passages branched off. Mining equipment lay abandoned, pickaxes, sledgehammers, and ore carts tipped on their sides like forgotten toys. This way, Thomas indicated the leftmost passage. Foreman kept his office away from the main operations, liked his privacy. Hayes raised his lantern. Thomas, look. The light revealed what Thomas had missed. Fresh boot prints in the damp earth, leading into the passage they intended to take. Someone's been here. Recent. Thomas crouched to examine the prints. Single set, man's boots. Garrett, Hayes suggested, or Montgomery himself. Thomas straightened. Either way, we proceed carefully. The side tunnel narrowed considerably, forcing them to walk single file. After 50 yards, it opened to a small chamber carved into the rock. Wooden shelving lined one wall. A heavy desk occupied the center, and a pot-bellied stove stood cold in the corner. The foreman's office, untouched by time. Someone's definitely been here. Thomas indicated disturbed dust on the desk, drawers left partially open. Hayes moved to the shelves, examining ledger books and equipment catalogs. Where would one hide a deed in a place like this? Not on a shelf in plain sight, Thomas replied, running his hands along the rough stone walls. Eleanor's map marked this room, but where exactly? They searched methodically the desk drawers, behind shelving, beneath floorboards. Nothing. The frustration mounted as minutes ticked by, each moment increasing the risk of discovery. Wait, Hayes said suddenly. The stove. He approached the cast-iron appliance, examining its construction. This doesn't vent properly for a mine. Too dangerous with coal dust. Thomas joined him, immediately seeing what Hayes had noticed. The stovepipe entered the wall at an odd angle, not the clean vertical one would expect. It's a false stove, a hiding place. Together they moved the heavy stove, revealing a small recess in the wall behind it. Thomas reached in, his fingers finding a metal box, roughly the size of a large book. This is it, he breathed, withdrawing the box. It was locked, but the aged mechanism gave way with a firm twist of his knife blade. Inside lay several documents, yellowed with age but preserved in the dry mountain air. Thomas carefully unfolded the largest and ornate deed to the Northridge mine, dated 1835, bearing the name Charles Wade as rightful owner. My God, Hayes whispered. Eleanor was right. Beneath the deed lay a leather-bound journal, its cover stamped with the initials M.W. Mary Wade. Thomas opened it with reverence, finding page after page of elegant script. The ink faded, but legible. Her testimony, he said quietly. Everything that happened. A sudden noise from the tunnel entrance froze them both. Footsteps growing close. Thomas quickly returned the documents to the box. We've got what we came for. Let's go. But it was too late. A figure blocked the doorway, revolver gleaming in the lantern light. Sheriff Wilson stood before them, his broken badge catching the dim light, his expression unreadable. Thomas Blackwood, he said evenly. You're under arrest for trespassing, theft and the kidnapping of Sarah Thompson. Hayes stepped forward. Wilson, you don't understand what's happening here. Montgomery has been lying to the town for generations. I understand more than you think, Doc. Wilson's gaze fixed on the metal box in Thomas's hands. That's what I think it is. Thomas made a split-second decision. See for yourself. He tossed the box. As Wilson instinctively caught it, Thomas lunged, tackling the sheriff to the ground. The revolver discharged, the shot deafening in the confined space, the bullet embedding in the ceiling. Dirt and small rocks rained down as the two men struggled. Run, Doc, Thomas shouted. Get to Sarah. Hayes hesitated only briefly before grabbing the box and fleeing down the tunnel. Wilson fought with surprising strength, landing a solid blow to Thomas's jaw. Stars exploded in his vision, but he maintained his grip on the sheriff's gun hand. You're making a mistake, Wilson growled. Montgomery knows about the cabin. His men are already on their way there. Thomas went cold with fear, his momentary distraction allowing Wilson to break free and level the revolver at his chest. It's over, Blackwood. Has been for 15 years. Drop the gun, Sheriff. The voice came from behind Wilson, steady and determined. Martha Jenkins stood in the tunnel entrance, a double-barreled shotgun aimed at the lawman's back. This doesn't concern you, Martha, Wilson said without turning. A corrupt sheriff threatening a man who's uncovering the truth. Concerns me plenty. Martha stepped further into the chamber, her aim unwavering. Thomas, you all right? Thomas rose slowly, keeping his eyes on Wilson's revolver. Fine. Doc got away with the evidence. Wilson's jaw tightened. Evidence of what exactly? Ancient history that doesn't matter anymore. Murder matters, Thomas replied. Theft matters. Truth matters. A flicker of something, regret perhaps, crossed Wilson's features. You have no idea what you're meddling with. Montgomery isn't alone in this, Hollister, Thomas guessed. They're working together. Wilson nodded reluctantly. Hollister arrived last night. He and Montgomery go way back, business partners for decades. Martha gestured with her shotgun. Put the revolver down, Wilson. We're leaving. The sheriff hesitated, then slowly lowered his weapon. You can't run forever, Thomas. They'll find Sarah eventually, not before we expose what they did to Eleanor. Thomas moved carefully toward Martha. You knew, didn't you, about Eleanor's investigation? Wilson's silence was answer enough. What happened to her? Thomas demanded, old anger rising. I found her handkerchief by the river, blood on it. I don't know, Wilson insisted. That's God's truth, Thomas. She disappeared. Montgomery claimed she stole company documents and left town. I had no reason to doubt him then. And now, Wilson looked down at his broken badge, damaged in their struggle, hanging by a single pin. Now I'm not sure of anything anymore. Martha kept the shotgun trained on Wilson as she and Thomas backed toward the tunnel. What will you do? She asked the sheriff. Wilson seemed to age before their eyes, the weight of 15 years of complicity settling on his shoulders. My job, I suppose, for once. They left him standing in the foreman's office, a solitary figure surrounded by the ghosts of Oakridge's past. Outside, the day had advanced, sunlight harsh after the mine's darkness. Thomas squinted, getting his bearings. Doc headed for the cabin, he asked Martha. She nodded. Took a horse from the livery before dawn. Said you'd need backup. A ghost of a smile crossed her weathered face. Didn't think he meant me. Thank you. Thomas touched her arm briefly. But you shouldn't have gotten involved. Montgomery won't forget it. I've been watching that man destroy lives for 30 years. Martha's voice hardened. Should have spoken up when he ruined Mary Wade. Should have spoken up when Eleanor disappeared. Won't stay silent a third time. They moved quickly through the woods, taking a circuitous route to avoid potential searchers. Thomas's thoughts raced ahead to the cabin, to Sarah and Hayes, hoping they'd reached safety before Montgomery's men. Eleanor kept a journal, Martha said suddenly as they crossed a small stream. Hidden in my attic. I found it after she vanished. Thomas stopped in his tracks. What? Why didn't you tell me? You were gone by then, and afterward, she shrugged. Seemed safer to keep quiet. What did it say? Many things. Her investigation into the mine ownership, her fears about Montgomery discovering what she knew. Martha paused. Her feelings for you. Thomas swallowed hard. You still have it, hidden in my cellar. Behind the rote vegetables, last place anyone looks. A hint of pride colored her tone. Eleanor was smart. Documented everything she found. Names, dates, financial records, showing how Montgomery's grandfather systematically stole the Wade family holdings. We need that journal. Completes the picture, with Mary Wade's testimony and the original deed. Martha nodded. I'll retrieve it tonight. Town will be focused on searching the woods. They continued in silence for a time, the forest growing denser as they approached the cabin's location. Thomas suddenly raised his hand, signaling a halt. Voices drifted through the trees ahead. Men speaking in low tones, the occasional clink of weapons. Montgomery's men, Thomas whispered. They found the cabin. Crouching low, they advanced until they could see the small clearing. 4 armed men surrounded the cabin, while a 5th, Garrett, stood on the porch, pounding on the door. Sarah Thompson, he shouted. By order of Richard Hollister, you will come with us now. No response came from inside. Thomas scanned the area, noting with relief that Doc Hayes's horse was nowhere to be seen. Perhaps they'd escaped in time. What now? Martha whispered. Thomas assessed their options. 2 against 5, with only Martha's shotgun and his hunting knife. Poor odds. A twig snapped behind them. Thomas whirled, knife ready, only to find Sheriff Wilson standing there, revolver holstered, hands raised slightly to show he meant no harm. They left an hour ago. Wilson said quietly. Hayes took Sarah out the back when he spotted Garrett's men approaching, heading for Miller's Crossing. Thomas stared at the sheriff, searching for deception and finding none. "Why are you telling us this?" Wilson's gaze drifted to the cabin, where Garrett had ordered his men to break down the door. 15 years of looking the other way. Gets heavy after a while. Martha lowered her shotgun slightly. "You switching sides, Sheriff?" "Just trying to find the right side," Wilson replied. For once, Miller's Crossing lay 5 miles east, where an old covered bridge spanned the river. Thomas rode hard, borrowing Wilson's horse while the sheriff returned to town, ostensibly to continue the official search in the wrong direction. Martha headed for her boarding house to retrieve Eleanor's journal, the three of them agreeing to rendezvous at Hayes's hunting lodge, beyond the crossing by nightfall. The afternoon sun beat down as Thomas approached the bridge. He slowed, scanning for signs of Hayes and Sarah. Hoofprints in the mud showed recent passage, but the surrounding woods remained still. A flash of movement caught his eye, a figure signaling from the trees on the far side of the crossing. Thomas dismounted, leading the horse slowly across the covered bridge, alert for any trap. "Thomas." Hayes emerged from the foliage, relief evident in his voice. "Thank God, we feared the worst when you didn't follow." Martha intervened. Thomas explained, "Where's Sarah?" "Safe at the lodge." "The baby's coming, Thomas. Started about an hour ago." Thomas felt a surge of anxiety. "It's too early, not by much. First babies are unpredictable." Hayes took the horse's reins. "She's strong, Thomas." Determined. They mounted together, riding double toward the hunting lodge nestled in a remote valley. Hayes had used it for years, a sanctuary where he could fish and escape Oakridge's constant demands on the town's only doctor. "The box?" Thomas asked. "Hidden under the floorboards. Original deed and Mary Wade's testimony, safe and sound. Wilson says Hollister arrived in town last night." Hayes nodded grimly. "Bad business. Hollister has a reputation, ruthless in business, worse in personal matters." The stories Sarah told. He trailed off, shaking his head. The lodge came into view, a solid structure of logs and stone, smoke curling from its chimney. Inside they found Sarah, lying on Hayes's bed, her face flushed with exertion. A young woman Thomas didn't recognize sat beside her, wiping her brow with a damp cloth. "Lily Miller," Hayes explained. "Midwife, happened to be gathering herbs near the crossing when we arrived." Sarah's eyes opened at Thomas's approach. "You made it," she whispered, managing a weak smile that transformed into a grimace as another contraction seized her. "Breathe through it," Lily instructed calmly. "That's right. The pains are coming quicker now." Thomas knelt beside the bed, taking Sarah's hand. "How are you holding up?" "Been better," she replied with surprising humor. "Did you find it? The proof Eleanor sought?" "We did. Original deed, Mary Wade's testimony. Martha's bringing Eleanor's journal tonight." Sarah squeezed his hand as another contraction began. "Good," she gasped, when it passed. "Eleanor deserves justice." Hayes pulled Thomas aside as Lily continued attending to Sarah. "We need to discuss next steps. Even with the evidence, Montgomery and Hollister have power, connections." "The circuit judge," Thomas suggested. "Judge Parker. He's no friend of Montgomery's. He's in Oakridge now, part of the town council meeting about the disturbance we've caused." Hayes ran a hand through his gray hair. "If we could get these documents to him." Their planning was interrupted by Sarah's sudden cry, louder, more urgent than before. Lily beckoned them back. "It's time," she announced. "Baby's coming now." The next hour passed in a blur of activity. Thomas found himself pressed into service, following Lily's calm instructions to heat water, provide clean linens, and support Sarah as she labored to bring new life into the world. Hayes assisted with professional detachment, though his eyes betrayed concern when the birth proceeded more rapidly than expected. Outside, the sun began its descent, painting the valley in golden hues. Thomas stepped onto the porch briefly for fresh air, his mind reeling between the immediate drama of birth and the larger conflict surrounding them all. A distant rider appeared on the valley path. "Martha," right on schedule, a satchel secured to her saddle. Thomas waved, guiding her to the lodge with relief. Made it without incident, she reported, dismounting stiffly. Town's in an uproar. Montgomery's offering a reward for information on Sarah's whereabouts. She patted her satchel. Got what we needed, though. From inside came the distinct sound of an infant's first cry, tentative at first, then growing stronger. Thomas and Martha exchanged glances before hurrying inside. Sarah lay exhausted, but radiant, cradling a tiny bundle wrapped in clean linen. Hayes stood nearby, a rare smile softening his weathered features. Lily worked efficiently, clearing away the evidence of birth. A girl, Sarah announced as Thomas approached. Healthy, despite her early arrival. Thomas gazed down at the infant, red-faced, eyes screwed shut, with a dusting of dark hair across her tiny head. She's beautiful, he said, his voice thick with emotion. I'm naming her Eleanor, Sarah said softly, for her grandmother. The simple statement hung in the air, its implications slowly registering in Thomas's mind. Not sister, grandmother. He looked at Sarah anew, seeing now what he'd missed. The familiar shape of her eyes, the determined set of her jaw, features he'd loved in another face, long ago. Eleanor was your mother, he whispered, not your sister. Sarah nodded, tears spilling down her cheeks. I couldn't tell you, not until I was sure I could trust you. She touched the infant's cheek gently. Eleanor Mary Blackwood. That was to be my name, before my mother disappeared. Thomas felt the room spin slightly, 15 years of grief and guilt crystallizing into a single, impossible question. Sarah, he said, his voice barely audible. Am I? Yes, she replied simply. You're my father, Thomas, and this child is your granddaughter. The revelation left Thomas speechless, his world tilting on its axis. He stumbled outside into the gathering dusk, mind reeling with implications. Eleanor had been pregnant when she disappeared. His child, their child, had been born somewhere far from Oakridge, and now that child had returned as a woman, with a child of her own. Dr. Hayes followed him onto the porch, offering a flask without comment. Thomas took a long swallow, the whiskey burning a path to his numb core. Did you know? He finally asked. Hayes shook his head. Suspected these past few days. The resemblance is there, if you look for it. 15 years, Thomas whispered. I should have searched harder, should have found them. From what Sarah tells, Eleanor made certain you couldn't. Hayes leaned against the porch railing. She was protecting you, Thomas, and your daughter. From what? Montgomery, Hollister. Hayes sighed heavily. According to Martha's hints about the journal, Eleanor discovered more than just the deed fraud. She found evidence of multiple murders. Anyone who questioned Montgomery's claim to the mine. Thomas thought of the blood-stained handkerchief he'd carried all these years. He hurt her, made her run, and she made a new life somewhere else. Raised your daughter as her sister for protection. Hayes glanced back toward the door. She must have loved you very much. Inside, Martha emerged from the bedroom, gently closing the door behind her. They're both sleeping, she reported. Lily's watching over them. Thomas accepted the satchel she offered, removing Eleanor's journal with reverent hands. The leather-bound bode was well worn, pages filled with the handwriting he remembered, precise yet flowing, like the woman herself. She documented everything, Martha said, settling into a chair by the fireplace. Land records, financial transactions, witness statements. The last entry was the day before she disappeared. Thomas opened to that page, heart clenching at the familiar script. Tomorrow I confront Montgomery with what I've found. Thomas will meet me afterward by the river, our spot, where I'll finally tell him about the baby. Then we'll leave this place forever. If anything happens to me, this journal and Mary's testimony must reach Judge Parker. The truth about Oakridge must be told. She never made it to the river, Thomas said, the pieces finally falling into place. Montgomery did something to her, but she survived somehow, got away, and couldn't risk returning, Hayes concluded. Not with your child to protect. A soft knock interrupted them. Lily stood in the doorway, her expression urgent. Riders coming up the valley, multiple horses. Thomas moved to the window, peering through the gathering darkness. Lanterns bobbed in the distance, at least 6 riders, approaching slowly but deliberately. Garrett, he guessed. How did they find us? Miller's Crossing isn't exactly secret, Hayes said grimly, and I wasn't hiding our tracks. Didn't know we'd be followed. Martha retrieved her shotgun from beside the door. How many shells you got, Doc? Hayes checked his revolver. 6 shots. Won't be enough. Thomas made a swift decision. Take Sarah and the baby out the back. There's a deer trail leading up to the ridge. You can cut across to Judge Parker's summer cabin from there. What about you? Hayes asked, already gathering medical supplies. I'll buy you time. Thomas checked the hunting rifle mounted above the fireplace. Loaded and ready. Get the evidence to Parker. All of it. Martha shook her head firmly. Not alone you won't. She hefted her shotgun. These old bones have one good fight left in them. Sarah appeared in the bedroom doorway, the baby cradled against her chest. Despite her exhaustion, determination shone in her eyes. Eleanor's determination. No, she said simply. No more running. No more hiding. She approached Thomas, her gaze steady. That's what my mother did. It cost her everything, Sarah. Thomas began. I'm a Wade and a Blackwood. She held his gaze. We face our enemies. Before Thomas could argue, the sound of approaching horses ceased. A voice called out from the darkness. Thomas Blackwood. This is Sheriff Wilson. Come out and talk. Thomas exchanged surprised glances with Hayes. Wilson could be a trap, Martha warned. Only one way to find out. Thomas moved to the door, rifle ready but not raised. Wilson, that really you? The sheriff stepped into the pool of light spilling from the lodge windows. Behind him stood not Garrett's men, but townspeople. Miller the blacksmith, Jenkins the storekeeper, and 3 others. Thomas recognized as longtime Oakridge residents. We came to help, Wilson said, his broken badge still hanging askew on his chest. Montgomery's arrested Judge Parker for questioning his authority. Garrett and his men are tearing the town apart, looking for Sarah. He nodded toward the house. Is she here? Is she safe? She's here, Thomas confirmed cautiously. Why the change of heart, Sheriff? Wilson's weathered face showed genuine regret. Martha left Eleanor's journal where I'd find it. Read enough to know I've been on the wrong side. We all have. Thomas studied the men behind Wilson, solid citizens, none particularly friendly to him in the past. And they've lived under Montgomery's thumb long enough. Wilson replied. Time to set things right. Miller stepped forward, his blacksmith's arms crossed over his massive chest. My father worked that mine, died when the shaft collapsed, after Montgomery refused proper support. His voice held 15 years of suppressed anger. If there's proof of what he's done, we want to hear it. Thomas looked back at Sarah, standing in the doorway with her newborn daughter, the future of Oakridge held in her arms. The past and present converged in this moment, offering a chance to heal wounds both personal and communal. Come inside, he said, lowering his rifle. We have quite a story to tell you. Dawn broke over the hunting lodge, revealing a scene far different from the previous evening. The main room now resembled a war council, with townsfolk gathered around the table where Eleanor's journal, Mary Wade's testimony, and the original mine deed lay open. Throughout the night, as Sarah rested with her newborn, Thomas and the others had methodically built their case against Montgomery and Hollister. Property records falsified, Wilson said, marking another item on his improvised evidence list. Witness testimony to the forged deed. Financial trails showing payoffs to county officials. He shook his head in disgust. Been enforcing Montgomery's law all these years, never questioning. Many of us are guilty of the same, Jenkins the storekeeper admitted. Easier to look away. Thomas studied the birth certificate they'd created for the infant, Eleanor Mary Blackwood, born to Sarah Wade Blackwood, father unknown. The document would establish the child's rightful claim as Eleanor's heir and Thomas's grandchild. Montgomery won't surrender without a fight, Miller warned. His blacksmith's hands curled into fists. Man like that, cornered, becomes dangerous. Hollister's worse, Thomas replied. From what Sarah's told us, he's obsessed with controlling the Wade bloodline. Sees their claim to the mine as his by marriage rights. Dr. Hayes entered from checking on Sarah. She's asking for you, Thomas. In the small bedroom, Sarah sat propped against pillows, the baby sleeping peacefully in her arms. Sunlight streamed through the window, illuminating them in a golden glow that caught at Thomas's heart. "The men are ready," he told her, sitting carefully on the bed's edge. "We'll head to town at noon, confront Montgomery publicly with the evidence." Sarah nodded, her face serene despite the danger ahead. "I've been thinking about my mother, what she must have gone through, alone and afraid." Thomas swallowed hard. "I should have found her. She didn't want to be found." Sarah adjusted the sleeping infant. "Not until she was ready. That's why she sent me the letter and locket when she did." "What do you mean?" Sarah's eyes grew distant. "Mother was sick. Consumption. She knew she wouldn't survive another winter." A single tear traced down her cheek. "Her last wish was for me to find you, to restore what was taken from us all." Thomas gently wiped away her tear. "When did she—" "3 months ago." Sarah met his gaze directly. "The same day I received her letter." As if she'd timed it perfectly. "Eleanor always did have a sense for timing," Thomas said softly. "Except that last night by the river." Sarah reached for his hand. "She told me about that night, said it was her greatest regret, not waiting longer for you." She hesitated. "There's something you should know, something she confessed on her deathbed." Thomas steeled himself. "What?" "She saw you coming that night, running toward their meeting place. But Montgomery's men were already there, waiting in ambush." Sarah's voice trembled. "She led them away, deliberately, to protect you." The revelation struck Thomas like a physical blow. All these years, he'd believed he'd failed her by arriving late. Instead, she had sacrificed her chance at happiness with him to save his life. "She never stopped loving you," Sarah continued. "Kept your picture, told me stories about my brave father." A sad smile touched her lips. "I grew up loving a man I'd never met," through her eyes. The bedroom door opened as Martha entered, her expression apologetic. "Sheriff's getting anxious. Says Montgomery called a town meeting for noon. Something about dangerous fugitives threatening Oakridge's peace." "We're ready," Thomas assured her, standing reluctantly. To Sarah, he added, "You and the baby should stay here. It's safer." "No," Sarah replied firmly, shifting to Rye. "My daughter deserves to witness the restoration of her birthright. Her grandmother would have wanted that." Outside, the men prepared horses for the ride to town. Thomas helped Sarah mount, the baby securely bundled against her chest. The small procession, justice seekers, Thomas thought, began their journey back to Oakridge with a sense of purpose that transcended personal vendettas. As they approached the town outskirts, a lone rider came galloping toward them. Thomas recognized young Billy Carter, the newspaper delivery boy, his face flushed with exertion. "Sheriff," Billy called, reining his horse to a sliding stop. "They've arrested Judge Parker. Montgomery's charging him with conspiracy, scheduled a hanging for sunset." Wilson paled. "He can't do that. That's federal jurisdiction." "He's declared martial law," Billy continued breathlessly. "Says outside agitators are threatening the town's safety." The boy's eyes darted to Thomas. "Garrett's men are patrolling the street. Montgomery's offering $500 for Thomas Blackwood, dead or alive." Thomas exchanged grim looks with the others. Their evidence meant nothing without Judge Parker to hear it. And with martial law declared, Montgomery had effectively appointed himself judge and executioner. "What about Hollister?" Thomas asked. "In the hotel," Billy reported, "making some kind of announcement about mining rights at the town meeting." Sarah clutched her baby tighter. "He's going to claim the mine as his own, through his marriage to my mother." "Not if we stop him," Thomas said firmly. Wilson drew his revolver, checking the chamber. "We need a new plan. Can't just ride into town now." "Actually," Thomas replied, "an idea forming. That's exactly what we're going to do." The town meeting had drawn nearly every resident of Oakridge to the square before the courthouse. Montgomery stood on the steps, resplendent in a tailored suit despite the early hour, his silver hair catching the midday sun. Beside him, a stranger in equally fine attire. Richard Hollister, Sarah had confirmed, addressed the crowd with practiced authority. As Eleanor Wade Hollister's lawful husband, he proclaimed, "All properties and claims belonging to the Wade family transferred to me upon her death. This includes the disputed Northridge mine, regardless of its original ownership." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Montgomery stepped forward with a reassuring smile. "Friends, Mr. Hollister has graciously offered to reinvest in our community. The mine will reopen, providing jobs and prosperity once again." His expression hardened. "But first, we must deal with those who would threaten our peace with false claims and dangerous accusations." He gestured to the side of the courthouse, where Judge Parker stood, flanked by armed men, his hands bound before him. The elderly judge's dignity remained intact, despite his circumstances, his gaze steady and defiant. "Judge Parker has abused his position, conspiring with known criminals, Thomas Blackwood and his accomplices, undermine Oakridge's rightful authorities." Montgomery's voice carried across the square. "For this treasonous action, frontier justice must be swift." From their vantage point behind the general store, Thomas and Wilson observed the proceedings with mounting concern. "They've actually built a gallows," Wilson whispered, in disbelief, nodding toward the wooden structure hastily erected beside the courthouse. Montgomery's lost his mind. "Fear does that," Thomas replied. "He's backed into a corner, knows we have the evidence." He glanced back to where Martha and Dr. Hayes waited with Sarah and the baby, hidden from view. "Everyone ready?" Wilson nodded. "Miller and his men are in position. Jenkins has the documents." "But Thomas," he hesitated. "This is risking everything on a very public gamble. Sometimes the only way to fight a lie is with the truth, spoken plainly for all to hear." Thomas checked his father's revolver, returned to him by Wilson as a gesture of trust. "Let's move." As Hollister continued extolling his plans for Oakridge's future, Thomas stepped into the square, walking calmly through the gathered townsfolk. A ripple of recognition spread, faces turning in surprise and alarm. "That's quite a claim, Mr. Hollister," Thomas called out, his voice carrying across the suddenly silent square. "Especially since your marriage to Eleanor Wade was legally void." Hollister turned sharply, his polished demeanor cracking at the unexpected interruption. "Blackwood," he hissed. "Seize him," he ordered Montgomery's men. Montgomery raised his hand, halting them. "Let him speak," he said smoothly. "Let everyone hear his desperate lies before justice is served." Thomas continued forward, unimpeded. "Not lies, Montgomery. Document. Legal proof that Eleanor Wade was forced into marriage before legal age, without proper consent, invalidating any claim Hollister has to Wade family properties." Sheriff Wilson emerged from the crowd, holding Eleanor's journal high. "Evidence that Montgomery's grandfather murdered the rightful mine owner and falsified deeds. Evidence that Montgomery himself continued this fraud and silenced anyone who discovered the truth." Garrett stepped forward from Hollister's side, hand moving to his gun. "Enough of this. I'll handle the problem, Mr. Hollister." "I wouldn't," Thomas warned. "Not with 30 rifles aimed at this square right now." As if on cue, Miller and several other men revealed themselves on rooftops and in windows surrounding the square, weapons trained on Montgomery's group. Hollister's face contorted with rage. "This is absurd. I demand you arrest these men immediately." "On what authority?" Judge Parker called from his position. "You hold no office here, sir, and it appears Mr. Montgomery's authority rests on foundations of sand." Thomas nodded to Jenkins, who stepped forward with the document case. The original mine deed, showing Charles Wade as rightful owner, Mary Wade's testimony detailing the theft of her brother's property, and most damning, he removed a final document, freshly created that morning, the birth certificate of Eleanor Mary Blackwood, born yesterday to Sarah Wade Blackwood. A collective gasp rose from the crowd as Sarah walked slowly into the square, baby cradled in her arms. Hayes and Martha flanked her protectively. "My mother was Eleanor Wade," Sarah announced, her clear voice carrying to every corner of the square. forced to flee Oakridge 15 years ago when she discovered the truth about Montgomery's crimes. I am her daughter, and Thomas Blackwood. The revelation sent shockwaves through the assembly. Montgomery's face drained of color, his composure finally cracking. Preposterous, Hollister sputtered. Eleanor had no child. She was with child when she fled. Thomas replied, moving to stand beside Sarah. My child, our child, he gestured to the infant. And this is our granddaughter, the rightful heir to the Wade fortune. Montgomery recovered slightly, his politician's instincts reasserting themselves. Touching story, but ultimately unprovable. Eleanor Wade Hollister died 3 years ago, leaving her husband as legal heir. Did she? Thomas countered. Or is that another convenient lie? From the edge of the crowd, a hooded figure stepped forward. Female, walking with a slight limp, her face concealed. As she reached the center of the square, she lowered her hood, revealing features aged by time and hardship, but unmistakable to those who had known her. Hello, Harold, said Eleanor Wade, very much alive. It's been a long time. The square fell utterly silent. Eleanor Wade, older, thinner, with streaks of gray in her once golden hair, stood resolute before the stunned assembly. Her gaze locked first on Montgomery, whose ashen face betrayed his shock, then moved to Hollister, who appeared as if seeing a ghost. Impossible, Hollister whispered. You died. I saw your body. You saw what I wanted you to see, Eleanor replied, her voice stronger than her frame suggested. A convenient substitute, properly attired, face obscured by grievous injuries. You were always too eager to believe what suited you, Richard. Sarah stepped forward, tears streaming down her face. Mother, she whispered, you're really here. Eleanor's composure briefly cracked as she beheld her daughter and newborn grandchild. I'm sorry for the deception, my darling. It was the only way to ensure your escape. Her gaze shifted to Thomas, a wealth of unspoken emotion passing between them. To ensure you all would be safe while I gathered the final evidence. Montgomery recovered first, his politician's instincts taking over. A touching reunion, but ultimately meaningless. This woman abandoned her husband and responsibilities years ago. Whatever claim she might have had is long forfeited. Is that what you told yourself after you tried to kill me, Harold? Eleanor asked calmly, after your men ambushed me by the river that night. The crowd's murmurs grew louder. Montgomery forced a dismissive laugh. Delusions from a disturbed woman. Eleanor reached into her worn coat, withdrawing a loaded revolver, Montgomery's own distinctive silver-plated weapon. Your men took this from your office that night, Harold. Used it to fire the shot that grazed my head. She touched a scar visible at her temple. I kept it all these years as evidence of your attempted murder. That proves nothing, Montgomery blustered, though sweat now beaded on his brow. Perhaps not alone. Eleanor nodded to Sheriff Wilson, who produced a sealed envelope. But this might, a sworn affidavit from your former foreman, Jacob Miller, confessing to the attack on your orders. He's been living with that guilt in Denver these past 15 years. My uncle, the blacksmith confirmed grimly, sent me a letter last month saying he was dying, wanted to make things right. Montgomery's confident facade began to crumble. This is absurd. These people are conspiring against me, against the very foundation of Oakridge. That foundation was built on murder and theft, Thomas said, stepping forward, on the suffering of the Wade family and countless others who stood in your way. Judge Parker, still bound but standing taller now, addressed the crowd. As the federal judicial authority in this territory, I call for the immediate arrest of Harold Montgomery on charges of attempted murder, fraud, and falsification of legal documents, and Richard Hollister, Eleanor added firmly, for forced marriage of a minor, false imprisonment, and conspiracy to commit fraud. Garrett and Montgomery's men exchanged uncertain glances, their loyalty visibly wavering as the tide of public opinion turned. This is preposterous, Hollister roared. I am a respected businessman with connections throughout the territory. He turned to Garrett. Do something. Garrett assessed the situation. the armed townspeople surrounding them, the damning evidence, the palpable shift in power, and slowly raised his hands in surrender. "Sorry, Mr. Hollister, this job's no longer worth the pay." Montgomery, seeing his support evaporating, made a desperate lunge toward Eleanor. "You ruined everything," he snarled, reaching for her throat. Thomas moved with surprising speed for a man his age, intercepting Montgomery with a solid punch that sent him sprawling onto the courthouse steps. The loaded revolver Thomas had carried remained holstered. Justice, not vengeance, would prevail today. As Wilson and his newly deputized townsfolk secured Montgomery and Hollister, Thomas approached Eleanor cautiously, as if fearing she might vanish like morning mist. For 15 years he had carried the weight of her disappearance. Now she stood before him, changed by time and hardship, yet unmistakably the woman he had loved. "You could have contacted me," he said quietly, emotion making his voice rough. "All these years, I couldn't risk it," Eleanor replied, her own voice thick with unshed tears. "Montgomery had spies everywhere. I had to protect our daughter." Her gaze drifted to Sarah and the baby. "I never stopped loving you, Thomas. Never stopped hoping we'd find our way back to each other." The courthouse clock began to toll noon, the sound rolling across the square like a proclamation. Judge Parker, now freed from his bonds, ascended the courthouse steps. "Citizens of Oakridge," he called, his judicial authority evident in every word. "Today marks a new chapter in your town's history. The truth has been revealed, but much work remains to set things right." He gestured to the documents Jenkins held. "Court will convene immediately to review this evidence and begin restoration of rightful ownership." As the crowd moved toward the courthouse, Thomas stood rooted in place, Eleanor beside him, Sarah approaching with their grandchild. 3 generations of a family torn apart by greed and corruption, now reunited in the very place their tragedy began. "What happens now?" Sarah asked softly. Eleanor and Thomas exchanged glances, a lifetime of missed opportunities hanging between them. "Justice," Eleanor said firmly, "then healing. And family," Thomas added, his hand finding Eleanor's, fingers intertwining as if the years apart had never been. "After all this time, family." The baby stirred in Sarah's arms, eyes opening to a world already transformed by her arrival, a world where her inheritance would no longer be one of secrets and sorrow, but of truth and reconciliation. Montgomery and Hollister were led away in chains, their empire of lies crumbling around them. The power they had wielded so ruthlessly had evaporated in the face of something stronger, the bonds of family and a community's awakening to justice, long delayed. "Come," Judge Parker called to them from the courthouse door. "Let's make this right at last." Together they ascended the steps, no longer fugitives, but rightful claimants to their heritage. Behind them, the townsfolk of Oakridge followed, witnesses to the beginning of a new era. The courthouse bustled with activity as Judge Parker established an impromptu tribunal. Townsfolk packed the benches, witness to a reckoning 15 years in the making. Thomas, Eleanor and Sarah sat at the front, the newborn sleeping peacefully despite the momentous proceedings. "These documents," Judge Parker announced, examining the original deed, "appear authentic. The seal and signatures match territorial records from 1835. He adjusted his spectacles, studying Mary Wade's testimony. "And this account details a systematic conspiracy to defraud the Wade family of their rightful property." Montgomery, seated under guard, maintained a veneer of indignation. "Hearsay from a woman declared legally insane. Hardly admissible, ever declared insane by your grandfather's doctor," Judge Parker countered, "after she accused him of murdering her brother. Convenient diagnosis, wouldn't you say?" Hollister, nearby but separated from Montgomery, spoke for the first time since his arrest. "Whatever Montgomery's crimes, they don't invalidate my legal rights as Eleanor's husband." Eleanor rose, her dignity cutting through Hollister's bluster. "Your Honor, I have documentation proving my marriage was contracted under duress when I was 16, below legal age, without parental consent." She presented a worn certificate. "My father's signature was forged. I obtained proof from county records before fleeing Oakridge." Judge Parker examined the certificate. The forgery is clear when compared with authentic examples of Edward Wade's signature. He looked pointedly at Hollister. This constitutes fraud. Sir, the marriage was never legally valid. A commotion at the courthouse entrance drew all eyes. Garrett entered, escorted by Wilson's deputies, his expression grim. Your Honor, we found these in Mr. Hollister's hotel room. He presented a bundle of papers. Appears to be correspondence between Montgomery and Hollister dating back 20 years. Judge Parker accepted the documents. As he read, his expression darkened. These letters explicitly discuss the conspiracy to control the Wade properties through forced marriage and fraud. He looked up, addressing the packed courtroom, and plans to eliminate anyone who discovered the truth. Montgomery lunged to his feet. Those are private communications. You have no right. Silence. Judge Parker's voice cracked like a whip. These letters reference the removal of Charles Wade, Eleanor Wade, and others who questioned your family's claim. They constitute evidence of conspiracy to commit murder. Hollister's composure finally shattered. It was Montgomery's idea, all of it. I merely protected my investment. Investment, Eleanor echoed, her voice laden with years of suppressed fury. Is that what you call forcing a young girl into marriage? Threatening her family, hunting her down when she escaped with her child? Thomas placed a steadying hand on Eleanor's arm, his quiet support giving her strength to continue. When I discovered I was carrying Thomas's child, Eleanor addressed the court, I knew Hollister would never accept it. The baby represented a legitimate Wade heir outside his control. I planned to meet Thomas that night, to flee together. Her voice faltered. Instead, Montgomery's men were waiting. They tried to kill me. You have no proof. Montgomery sneered, though his confidence was clearly eroding. Sheriff Wilson stepped forward, presenting the silver-plated revolver Eleanor had produced earlier. Ballistics report from Denver, Your Honor. The bullet recovered from the scene matches this weapon, registered to Harold Montgomery. And there's this, Hayes added, presenting a sworn statement. Medical examination I performed on Eleanor last night, documenting a 15-year-old gunshot wound consistent with her account. Judge Parker nodded gravely. The evidence is substantial and damning. He straightened, his judicial authority filling the courtroom. I hereby rule the original mine deed valid and binding. Ownership reverts to the Wade family heirs, specifically Eleanor Wade and her daughter Sarah, with all accumulated profits to be calculated and restored. A murmur of approval rippled through the courthouse. Furthermore, the judge continued, Harold Montgomery and Richard Hollister are remanded to federal custody to face charges of fraud, conspiracy, attempted murder, and illegal detention. He looked to Sheriff Wilson. They are to be transported to Denver immediately for formal arraignment. As deputies moved to escort the prisoners out, Montgomery suddenly broke free, revealing a small derringer hidden in his sleeve. Before anyone could react, he lunged toward the evidence table, snatching the original deed. If I burn this, you have nothing, he shouted, backing toward the pot-bellied stove in the corner. Thomas moved with surprising speed, positioning himself between Montgomery and his family. It's over, Harold. The truth is out. The truth. Montgomery laughed bitterly. The truth is Oakridge is mine, built by my family, maintained by my efforts. His eyes had a dangerous, desperate gleam. I won't let some long-lost whore and her bastard child take it from me. The slur against Eleanor and Sarah ignited something primal in Thomas. He advanced on Montgomery, unarmed but resolute. Put the gun down, Harold. You've lost. Stay back. Montgomery warned, aiming the derringer at Thomas's chest. The courtroom froze in terrified anticipation, the confrontation balancing on a knife's edge. Thomas continued his steady approach, his voice calm but firm. 15 years ago, I ran from this town carrying the weight of failure. Thought I'd abandoned the woman I loved when she needed me most. Thomas's gaze never wavered from Montgomery's. I've lived with that burden every day since. I'm not running anymore. Montgomery's hand trembled. I'll shoot you where you stand, Blackwood. Maybe, Thomas acknowledged, still advancing slowly, but it won't change what happens next. Truth has a way of enduring, Harold, even when the deed burns, even when people die. For a moment, something like doubt flickered across Montgomery's face. Then his expression hardened, finger tightening on the trigger. The shot rang out, deafening in the confined space of the courthouse. Thomas flinched, anticipating pain that never came. Instead, Montgomery staggered backward, a crimson stain spreading across his immaculate waistcoat. The derringer clattered unfired to the floor. Sheriff Wilson stood at the courtroom entrance, his revolver still raised, wisp of smoke curling from the barrel. Enough, he said simply, his broken badge gleaming in the afternoon light streaming through the windows. Montgomery clutched at his wound, disbelief etched on his features. The deed slipped from his fingers, drifting to the floor like autumn leaves. You shot me, he gasped, laces to his knees. Your own benefactor. I shot a man threatening murder in my courthouse, Wilson replied, holstering his weapon. My duty, nothing more. Dr. Hayes rushed forward, medical instincts overriding personal feelings. He knelt beside Montgomery, assessing the wound with practiced hands. Lower right chest. Missed vital organs, but he needs immediate attention. See to him, Judge Parker ordered, then addressed the stunned courtroom. This proceeding will reconvene tomorrow. Deputies, secure Miss Hollister in the jail. As Montgomery was carried to Dr. Hayes's office for treatment, Eleanor approached the fallen deed, retrieving it with trembling fingers, the physical proof of her family's claim, nearly destroyed in Montgomery's final desperate act. It's finally over, she whispered, smoothing the ancient parchment. Thomas moved to her side. Is it? For 15 years you've lived in hiding, fighting this battle alone. Eleanor met his gaze, years of hardship evident in her eyes, yet something else too, resilience, hope. Not alone. I carried you with me, Thomas. The memory of what we shared, the promise of what might have been. Sarah joined them, the baby stirring in her arms. And now, she asked, her voice carrying the weight of uncertainty. What happens to us? Before either could answer, Garrett entered the courthouse, his usual confident demeanor subdued. He approached cautiously, hands visible to show he meant no threat. Mrs. Wade, he addressed Eleanor, formally, deliberately avoiding Hollister's surname. There are matters requiring your attention at Mr. Hollister's hotel suite. Eleanor stiffened. What matters? Financial documents, property deeds, items I believe rightfully belong to you. Garrett hesitated. I was hired to find you, not harm you. I'd like to make amends, if possible. Judge Parker nodded permission, and they followed Garrett to the hotel. Inside Hollister's opulent suite, he unlocked a traveling safe, revealing stacks of documents and several leather-bound ledgers. Hollister's financial empire, Garrett explained, stepping back, built largely on Wade family properties and investments. The combination of his business acumen and your family's holdings made him one of the wealthiest men in the territory. Eleanor examined the papers, recognition dawning. These are my father's investment portfolios, banking interests in Denver, railroad stakes, cattle ranches. She looked up, stunned. He stole everything, and now it returns to its rightful owner, Garrett said. All of it. Thomas watched Eleanor absorb the implications, not just the mine, but an entire fortune reverting to her control. The wealth would secure Sarah's future, the baby's future, generations of security that Eleanor had been denied. Why are you doing this? Thomas asked Garrett. The man shrugged. I've done Hollister's dirty work for years, telling myself I was just following orders. Time to choose a different path. He placed a final document on the table, prison keys. These unlock the cells in the town jail. Sheriff Wilson thought you might want to speak with Hollister before he's transferred to Denver. Eleanor considered the keys, then shook her head. He's no longer part of our story. As afternoon stretched toward evening, they returned to the boarding house, now abuzz with activity as townsfolk stopped by to offer support, and in many cases, apologies for years of willing blindness. Martha orchestrated it, that with brisk efficiency, ensuring Eleanor, Sarah and the baby had quiet moments amidst the commotion. In a quiet corner of the parlor, Thomas and Eleanor finally found a moment alone. The years apart hung between them, a gulf both vast and surprisingly narrow. "When I thought you were gone forever," Thomas began, his voice low, "a part of me died that day. I've been half a man since, and I've been half a woman," Eleanor replied softly. "Living in shadows, always looking over my shoulder. We've lost so much time." Eleanor reached out, her hand finding his as it had in the courthouse square. Perhaps this was our path, the only way to find justice, to secure our daughter's future. Her fingers tightened around his. "The question is, what do we do with the time we have now?" Thomas looked toward the window, where Sarah sat in the fading sunlight, singing softly to her newborn daughter. Their granddaughter, a future neither had dared imagine. "We build something new," he said finally, "something honest on a foundation of truth rather than lies." "Here, in Oakridge?" Eleanor asked, surprise coloring her voice. "After everything that's happened?" Thomas considered the town that had rejected him, that had believed the worst of Eleanor, that had allowed Montgomery's corruption to flourish. Yet also the town where Miller, Jenkins, Wilson, and others had finally stood for justice, where their story had begun, and perhaps could continue. "Oakridge needs healing as much as we do," he said. "The mine reopening will bring new life to the town, new opportunities, and new leadership," Eleanor added, understanding dawning in her eyes. "Someone who knows the value of honest work, of fair treatment." Thomas smiled, the first genuine smile in 15 years. "Are you offering me a job, Mrs. Wade?" "I'm offering you a partnership, Mr. Blackwood." Her eyes held a spark of the young woman he'd fallen in love with so long ago. In all things, outside the church bells tolled, not in alarm but marking the hour, 6 chimes that seemed to herald not just evening's arrival but the beginning of something long delayed. As the last note faded, baby Eleanor began to cry, her tiny voice carrying the promise of tomorrows yet to come. 1 year later, Oakridge had transformed. The mine operated once more, with safety measures that surpassed territorial regulation. Former miners returned, joined by new families drawn by fair wages and the promise of prosperity built on honest work rather than exploitation. Thomas stood at the edge of the newly established cemetery, hat in hand, watching as the simple headstone was set in place. The morning sun cast long shadows across the grass, dew still clinging to the carved letters, Eleanor Wade Blackwood, beloved wife, mother, grandmother. "It feels strange," Eleanor said, standing beside him, her hand tucked in his. "Seeing my own name on a grave." "A necessary fiction," Thomas replied. Eleanor Wade Hollister needed to rest in peace, so Eleanor Wade Blackwood could live in the open. The small ceremony concluded, the stonemason departing with respectful nod. They remained, 3 generations together, Thomas, Eleanor, Sarah, and the baby, now a bright-eyed 1-year-old, taking her first tentative steps on the cemetery path. "Mother would have appreciated the irony," Sarah remarked, lifting her daughter as she toppled mid-stride. "Her death finally bringing us freedom." "Mary Wade would have appreciated it too," Eleanor added, gazing toward another new headstone nearby, her grandmother, reinterred with dignity and truth after decades in an unmarked asylum grave. The Wade women finally receiving justice. They walked together toward town, where preparations continued for the evening celebration, the first anniversary of what Oakridge now called Restoration Day. The courthouse square had been transformed with bunting and tables, music and dancing planned to mark the occasion. Martha Jenkins waited on her boarding house porch, now officially the Oakridge Hotel, after extensive renovations financed by the reopened mine's profits. She waved as they approached. "Judge Parker's just arrived," she announced. "Says the territorial governor might make an appearance later." "Politicians never miss an opportunity to associate with success," Thomas observed, with wry amusement. Inside, Dr. Hayes sat with Sheriff Wilson, sporting a new unbroken badge, reviewing plans for the town's first proper hospital. Hayes would train a younger doctor to eventually take his place, ensuring Oakridge's medical care continued for generations. The Denver newspapers arrived, Wilson said, handing Thomas the latest edition. "Montgomery's appeal was denied. He and Hollister will serve their full sentences." Thomas nodded, requiring no further discussion of the men who had caused such pain. Their names were seldom mentioned in Oakridge anymore, their legacy systematically dismantled and replaced with something more just. "Mayor Blackwood," called a voice from outside. Miller the blacksmith, now head of the town council, beckoned. "They're asking for a few words before tonight's festivities." Thomas grimaced. The title still sat uncomfortably on his shoulders, accepted reluctantly at the town's insistence 6 months earlier. "Speeches were never my strength." Eleanor straightened his collar affectionately. "Then speak plainly, as you always do. They respect that more than flowery words." In the square, townsfolk gathered, many faces new, others familiar, but transformed by the year's changes. Thomas stood on the courthouse steps, momentarily transported back to that fateful day when truth had finally prevailed over generations of lies. A year ago, Oakridge stood at a crossroads. He began simply. Built on a foundation of deception, the town faced a choice: continue in comfortable falsehood or embrace uncomfortable truth. Nods of acknowledgement rippled through the crowd. You chose truth, chose justice, even when it meant admitting complicity and past wrongs. Thomas gestured to the rebuilt mine entrance, visible on the hillside. Now Oakridge stands as an example to the territory, proof that prosperity need not come at the expense of integrity. Applause followed his brief remarks, genuine and warm. As Thomas stepped down, Miller clasped his shoulder. "Never thought I'd see the day when a Blackwood led Oakridge. Your father would be proud." Later, as evening descended and celebration filled the square with music and laughter, Thomas found a quiet moment with Eleanor on the edge of the gathering. They watched as Sarah danced with a young rancher who'd recently started calling at the house, baby Eleanor delighting onlookers from Martha's arms nearby. "I never dared dream of this," Eleanor admitted, leaning into Thomas's embrace. "All those years in hiding, I hoped only that Sarah might someday find safety, perhaps happiness." This, she gestured to the thriving community around them, seemed impossible. Thomas pulled her closer, the silver pocket watch in his vest once again keeping accurate time, wound daily since their reunion. "Not impossible, just delayed." Eleanor turned in his arms, studying his face in the lantern light. The past year had softened some of the hard lines etched by 15 years of regret, though the silver at his temples had spread further. To her, he had never been more handsome. "Any regrets?" she asked softly. Thomas considered the question, his gaze taking in the town that had once rejected him, and now looked to him for leadership. The family he'd thought forever lost, now restored and growing. The sense of purpose that filled each day, just one, he said finally. "That we can't reclaim those lost years." "Perhaps not," Eleanor replied, her hand finding his. "But they shaped who we are, brought us to this moment, and I find I rather like who we've become." As the music swelled and dusk deepened into night, Thomas and Eleanor joined the dancers, moving together as if the intervening years had been merely a pause between songs. Around them, Oakridge celebrated not just its rebirth, but the triumph of truth over deception, of justice long delayed but finally delivered. The young baby watched from Martha's arms, her future now unfolding in a town rebuilt on honesty, her inheritance not merely wealth, but the legacy of those who had refused to surrender to injustice, no matter the cost. She would grow knowing the truth of her family's story, not a burden to bear but a testament to enduring love and the healing power of truth, finally spoken aloud.